Well, the U.S. has officially sent home a Guantanamo Bay detainee who had been held without trial for 12 years. 44-year-old Ahmed Belbacha became the first prisoner released from the Pentagon Detention Center this year. His transfer takes the prisoner population down to 154. In early 2001, Belbacha went to Afghanistan and, according to a leaked file, received weapons, training, and a militant camp there. Soon after, he fled to Pakistan, but was later turned over to the United States. Nonetheless, Belbacha was cleared for release from Gitmo in 2007. However, he was among dozens of detainees who remained stuck there while the Obama administration's efforts to close down the detention center were stalled. Belbacha returns to Algeria, where he faces a 20-year sentence after being convicted by Algeria on terror-related charges. And while one man is being freed, another is still fighting to go back to his home country of Yemen. Emad Hassan has been held without charge in Gitmo since 2002, though he was technically cleared for release in 2009. And that means he's been at Guantanamo for 12 years. Hassan has now become the first Guantanamo Bay prisoner to have his claims of abuse at the military base considered by a U.S. court of law. As a longtime hunger striker, Hassan says he has been force-fed more than 5,000 times in the last 7 years. During that time period, attorneys say the conditions were abusive and are considered a form of torture. Hassan's case presents the first legal move to be brought before civilian courts following last month's decision by a federal appeals court to allow this kind of challenge to move forward. As the first comprehensive hearing in the U.S. judicial system over the legality of force feeding, there's a lot at stake here. I was joined earlier by one of the lawyers representing his case, Jon Eisenberg. I started out by asking Jon to talk about water cure, which is a practice his client says was used on him.
There are two types of water torture, pumping and choking. Pumping is achieved by forcing copious amounts of water or fluid into the stomach in a short period of time. It causes the stomach and intestines to expand and convulse very painfully. Choking is what's also known as waterboarding. That is when water is poured over a cloth into the mouth and causes a choking sensation, the feeling of drowning.
And is that something your client, Emad Hassan, had experienced? How would you describe his force-feeding conditions?
He is being abused with water via pumping rather than choking or waterboarding. He's not being waterboarded, as far as we know. He is being given very large quantities of fluid through oversized nasogastric feeding tubes in a short period of time, perhaps 2/3 of a gallon in perhaps 30 minutes, twice a day, which is causing him considerable pain. He frequently vomits during the process. Occasionally, sometimes frequently, a laxative is given to the detainees in conjunction with the liquid nutrient, which causes him to defecate during the force-feeding process. Afterwards, they're held in a restraint chair for as much as 2 hours, frequently sitting in their own filth.
Wow. Well, we're talking about a man who's been force-fed over 5,000 times, which is hard for anyone, I'm sure, to wrap their heads around. What kind of long-term effect has this had on his body or his health more generally?
He is suffering from chronic pancreatitis. He is weak. One can only speculate as to his psychological condition. He's been subject to abuse for 7 years. He is in very poor shape physically.
And this will be the first case requiring a U.S. judge to review a Gitmo prisoner's detailed testimony describing the treatment. What outcome is the prosecution seeking here?
Well, it's not quite prosecution. If you're referring to us, the petitioner, what outcome is Mr. Hassan seeking? He's basically seeking two things. First, cease the abusive techniques being used in his force feeding. Leave the feeding tube in from time to time over a period of 30 to 45 days, as is customary medical practice, and slow down the force feeding so that it doesn't approach a form of abuse that's been practiced since the Middle Ages. Secondly, he is also seeking to forestall the force feeding until it's truly necessary. In the federal prison system, hunger striking detainees, prisoners, are not force-fed until they're at imminent risk of death or great bodily injury. Mr. Hassan is asking for that as well. Don't force-feed him yet. He is not dying. Don't force-feed any of these detainees until it is absolutely necessary, and if it is to be done, do it in a humane fashion. These force feedings are being employed not out of medical necessity, but to coerce these men from ceasing their hunger strike.
So just to be clear, that outcome, if you guys won this case, it would only apply to Emad Hassan. But what kind of implications would this have for other detainees? Would it end the practice immediately for them as well?
I believe it would, and I believe it should. It's hard for me to believe that if a court determines and an appellate court affirms that these men are being force-fed abusively and prematurely, that the government would stop it only for Emad Hassan and would continue to commit unconstitutional and internationally condemned practices upon all the others.
And Jon, in conjunction with this news story, we're also learning that there are new Guantanamo Bay prison guidelines that describe hunger-striking detainees as undergoing, quote, long-term non-religious fasting. So they're no longer categorizing them as hunger strikers. What's the rationale behind that?
It's not difficult to figure it out. As of last March, the regulations governing hunger striking at Guantanamo Bay were public information. The end of this past year, November and December, the government redrafted the regulations. They're called protocols or standard operating procedures governing force feeding at Guantanamo. They have kept most of those redrafted provisions secret. I have seen some of them. I am not permitted to see others of them. But what I have seen that's designated secret, I cannot discuss in public. What I can tell you about the revised protocols publicly is what's been released and redacted portions of the revised protocols. They are no longer addressed to hunger striking. They are addressed to weight loss, detainees with weight loss. I believe the government, since the hunger strike of last year, has embarked upon a new tactic of rebranding the hunger strike as nothing more than unexplained weight loss. They are no longer releasing figures for how many people are hunger striking and being force-fed. Our understanding from the detainees is currently 35 of them or so are hunger striking, and about 16 of those are being force-fed. But the government will not confirm or deny this. They have decided in a very Orwellian twist to oppose the hunger strike by pretending it's not happening.
And Jon, Emad Hassan has been cleared for release. He's been cleared since 2009. The Department of Justice announced today that one of his fellow detainees was released back to Algeria. What's the holdup in Hassan's release?
You would have to ask President Obama. I do not know. The detainee who was released today was one of 4 detainees that commenced a similar action to Hassan's last summer, in which Reprieve UK and I were the lawyers on their behalf. 2 of those 4 detainees have now been released, which is a very good thing. 2 of them remain at Guantanamo Bay, as well as Emad Hassan, and at this point, I believe about 74 others, roughly 75, remain at Guantanamo Bay who have been cleared for release. Why they have not been released yet, I don't know, but the time is here.
Well, we do appreciate you coming on and breaking down this case. Jon Eisenberg, pro bono counsel for Emad Hassan. Late this afternoon, we received a statement from the Pentagon regarding this matter. It said Jon Eisenberg has no access to the health records, so opining about the amount of liquid used or the time it takes to deliver it is interesting but irrelevant. Counsel dutifully relaying the agenda of their clients is nothing new. What I can tell you is that the methods administered on the few at Guantanamo who require it are both humane and necessary to preserve life.